Hello everyone and welcome to this In Focus event. My name is John. I am the Exhibition and Retail Coordinator at Street Level, and it is my great pleasure in hosting this In Focus talk, where we will be hearing from some of the artists involved in the New Photographers Guild. I'll just invite the guys to come back on the screen just now, and then we'll get started. Hi everyone. So for those of you who might not be so familiar with the New Photographers Guild, I'll give a kind of very quick introduction to what the New Photographers Guild is, and then I will hand over to James Pfaff and Claire Stewart, who are two of the mentors who kind of run the programme and really help guide the photographers through their journey as part of the MPG, as we call it. So the New Photographers Guild is a mentored photography programme which prepares recent graduates for professional life beyond education, and it has run yearly since 2016. It is led by photographer Elaine Livingstone, photography lecturers Claire Stewart and Laura Liebnitz, as well as James Pfaff, who's a photographic artist, and the MPG runs in association with Street Level. The New Photographers Guild is just one part of Street Level's ongoing commitment to support early career photographers and artists, alongside other initiatives such as the Round Table, our Future Proof exhibition that happens every year, as well as our online programme of In Focus artist talks, of which this is one. So before we hear from the artists themselves, we're going to hear a little bit from Claire and James about what the New Photographers Guild is and how it came about.
Yeah. Okay, hi everybody. I just wanted to give a bit of background on how we came up with MPG, and it actually started in 2012 in another guise as the Young Photographers Alliance, the YPA we called it, and it was a global mentoring initiative and involved groups of people from all around the world who were being mentored by picture editors and photography lecturers, and that's how I got involved in that through being with Elaine Livingstone, who at that time was picture editor at the Sunday Herald. So we started then, and we each year Glasgow, the mentoring programme started off as a competition as well, and each year Glasgow won the YPA competition, and then for some strange reason, and the next year we were dropped from the programme, so we decided to set up our own mentoring initiative, and we thought we don't really need this a global support. We can do it on our own, so we set one up ourselves as the New Photographers Guild, and like John says, that runs every year. We meet every month, and we have visiting artists that will come. I think James will talk a wee bit more about this in a minute. So I guess for me, when I left, I went to Glasgow School of Art, and when I left, I felt a bit all at sea, and as if I was sort of falling into a void when I came out. A lot of my friends that I made at art school sort of scattered to back to where they came from, to Germany and Denmark, and I was kind of left a wee bit sort of on my own. So I understand from a personal point of view what it feels like to come out of college once you've graduated and to feel that you don't have any support. So for me, it allows me to help people who were in my position when they come out of, well, this year actually predominantly from art school, but we do have people from other colleges who apply each year. We've also had people from England apply as well. We had a mentee from Newcastle, I think, James, is that right? I remember. And we've had people from the Highlands and Islands and all over apply as well. So it's open to any recent graduate.
And what we're really,
so I think James is going to talk a wee bit, about.
So what we offer is a continuation, I think, of study, a kind of a format that everybody recognises, that students are used to. So that's quite comforting. We also offer new opportunities. We have meetings with Stephen Palmer, for example, from Creative Scotland. We've had my curator in, Francesca Serravalle, who's some of you know, we've got project and beyond that, market yourself and how to perhaps re-strategize. So this really continuation, something which is quite comfortable for them. Through that program, we're looking at process, we're building up a project with an exhibition at the end. And then in the middle, as I say, we've got people coming in, ex-mentees, Stephen Palmer Creative Scotland, Francesca. These are people that perhaps always just get an introduction to. And then beyond that, the important part, thinking about how to, I think what's important to say is everybody who's on the course is already quite a well-established and experienced artist. So the big question for us is, how can you make the next step? You know, what's the difference between a well-established artist who's not got much visibility and one who does? So we're trying to make that bridge between these 2 points. And we do that through, you know, maybe just even simple things for people who are uncomfortable perhaps with networking. We can change that word to just being professional. So it's a little bit the processes and how you advance yourself. So I think that's the 3 components of the program.
Brilliant. We seem to have a little bit of an internet lag there with you, James, but I think we got most of what you were saying, if not all of it. But yeah, I mean, I can speak myself as someone who's gone through the process as a photographer and taken part in the New Photographers Guild, and it was a really invaluable experience for me. Again, bridging that gap between education and real life, and you know, the people that I met there, not just the visiting kind of talks and stuff that we had, but also my fellow photographers. I made really good friends and seen work that I wouldn't normally have, you know, or maybe wouldn't have normally got to experience. So do keep an eye out on our website for when the application's open for the New Photographers Guild. And yeah, really looking forward to hearing from this year's contingent. So I'll quickly introduce the artists that we have with us tonight, and then I'll give them all a little kind of more specific introduction just before they share the slides. But if you guys want to just say hello to your audience. So we're joined by Sean Patrick Campbell.
Hello.
We're joined by Erin Semple.
Hi.
Lyndon Kingston. Melissa Mitchell.
Hi there.
And Fiona Hunter.
Hi everyone.
We were supposed to hear from Tracy McLeod as well, who is also an artist taking part in this year's programme, but unfortunately couldn't make it tonight. But if you visit our website, there is a kind of gallery that has some examples of his work. So I'm sure he's here with us in spirit. Okay, so the first artist that we're going to hear from today is Sean Patrick Campbell. He's an artist and musician living and working in Glasgow, and he graduated from Glasgow School of Arts Fine Art Photography Department in 2019. Sean works primarily with analogue photographic processes, as well as sculpture, moving image and writing. So it's my great pleasure to hand over to Sean, and looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Thanks very much, John. Hang on a second. It says that screen sharing is disabled.
I ticked the wrong thing. Sorry, that should be good.
Okay, I think that's it now. Just see. Can everyone see that okay?
Yeah.
Yes, we can see that, Sean.
Excellent. So yeah, thanks for the intro, John. I'm Sean Patrick Campbell. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to sort of run through some of the projects that I've made in the past, and just talk a little bit about my process and sort of how that's led me to where I am just now. So when I when I joined the Fine Art Photography programme in 2015, I hadn't actually been a visual artist prior. I've been a musician since my teens, but hadn't really made photography until fairly recently. So when I started thinking about what I wanted to make, it seemed sort of sensible to start with my hometown. Started going back and photographing my hometown of Greenock. I'm from Inverclyde, like 20 miles down the coast from Glasgow. So Greenock, Gourock and Port Glasgow are the sort of places that I called home growing up. Inverclyde has a sort of complicated history, and I was reading this photo book, Tales of Tono, by Japanese photographer Daido Moriyama, and in an essay that accompanied that book, he wrote, "The idea of a hometown is a swollen utopia of countless childhood memory fragments. It's something like the original landscape." And I really liked that idea of sort of mapping out an original landscape rather than a sort of representative documentary approach to showing what, you know, Greenock and Inverclyde are like. As I said, it's got quite a complex and sometimes violent history, and it sits across the water from Faslane, where the Scottish cache of nuclear weapons is held. Trident, which is, you know, on the news quite often, especially just now in the context of Scottish independence. So sort of thinking about what my childhood was like growing up there, which was, you know, it's a very loving childhood, and I had a really nice family life, but there was this kind of almost like hauntological fear that sort of penetrated my experience. You know, the spectre of the Cold War. You know, I sort of was born in 1985, so right at the tail end of that, but having this sort of visible sort of cache of nuclear weapons really made an impact on me. So I've been going back and I've been photographing Inverclyde for the last 5 years, and this is an ongoing project, one that I imagine will last for a lot longer as well. There's kind of no end in sight with it. I think I just need to make some slices and decide how I'm going to show it. But the sort of interest in nuclear histories led me to Albuquerque in New Mexico, which is where I did my exchange semester in third year at art school. And when I was in Albuquerque, I visited the Trinity test site in the White Sands missile base, and that's the location of the first ever atomic bomb test. And it was a very, very strange experience. You had to join this very long caravan of cars from the car park of the high school, travel for hours, and then eventually you got to this, you know, a big empty pit in the desert. And it was this such intense, like earth-breaking violence that existed there. You know, this kind of like ground zero of American Western exceptionalism, but it was treated as a total tourist spot. So there were hot dogs and sodas for sale in the car park, and you could buy t-shirts and mugs that said "I survived Trinity." There were people taking selfies in front of the replica of the Fat Man that was dropped on Hiroshima, and it recombined something in my brain about what happens when you visit these places and try to represent them through photography. And that day it led to me making this series of self-portraits, which was completely new for my practice at the time. And for the rest of the time that I spent there, was just thinking a lot about the way these kind of violent mythologies proliferate, whether it's through images or through, you know, the sort of the narratives of mythology. I ended up making a lot of photographs there that form this project, which is called Single Days Journey of the Dead, which is a reference to the route that runs through White Sands in southern New Mexico. And I think this was the big shift for me from thinking of, you know, objective ideas of place and representation towards moving towards building a grammar of expressing the ways in which I see and experience the world, and making it clear that it's not a universal experience. You know, I moved through the world with a lot of privilege, and it made me really committed to trying to make work from the inside rather than from the outside. So when I went back from a fourth year, I was thinking about all of those things, thinking about nuclear histories, thinking about the power of photography. But I was also reading a lot of ecology-focused philosophical work by people like Donna Haraway, Timothy Morton, and also, you know, cultural and political critics like Mark Fisher. So I was thinking a lot about systemic violences on local and global scales. So I started making this work for my degree show called A Herald in Vibrant Ends. Here I was thinking about the psychic impacts of living in the Anthropocene, which is the human-made epoch that we live in currently, where the suggestion is that capitalism has made such irreparable damage to the earth that future geologists will be able to see the damage that we've done before they can see anything else. You know, there are a lot of artists making work about things like this. I didn't want to make something that was like a large scale, you know, Ed Bratinsky style work. I wanted to make something that was intimate, using the language of myth and poetics and stories. I don't know how successful it was. I feel like I've got unfinished business with it. I think a lot of people find that when they do their degree show, it's a huge anticlimax. And at the time, it feels like everything. It feels like, you know, it's the absolute ultimate thing. But when you get out the other side of it, you realise it was sort of just another show. And it was really important for me for clarifying some of these ideas. But yeah, I don't feel like having a degree show with this work finished the work in any way. And so when I finished at art school, I took a break, took 6 months break, which a lot of people do. And my friend Alan Gardner, who's an artist based in Leeds, invited me to collaborate with him on a show called Tulpa, which took place at Block Projects in Sheffield. So the idea of a tulpa is a thought form that's made manifest. And I really liked that idea from a photographic perspective. I'm just going to pause this here because I want to make sure that this image is on the screen. Sorry, give me 1 second.
Could I just say something, Sean, while you're just doing that, just very briefly? Obviously, it's been a really disrupted year this year for our mentees. So what we're actually asked the mentees to do to show really anything they wanted that was kind of relative to their practice. So you're not necessarily seeing stuff which is in the process of being finalised for the end of our programme, but more a kind of general overview of their practices.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I sort of, yeah, I touch on that a little bit as well, James, but thanks for bringing it up. So the idea of these like photographs as thought forms being made manifest in space, I was kind of already working around and through those ideas, but had a bit of a disaster at the show. The idea was that I would make these images that were printed directly onto aluminium with printing gum, but during transit they got damaged, basically, really quite badly. And I only received them on the day that the show was supposed to open. So I was in the gallery. I had this was like, you know, I had some work that was already prepared, but the rest of the work was these images. And you know, I was sat in the gallery and I was just completely panicking. And I just had this kind of revelation that like the only thing that matters outside of the context of art school is to get some work on the wall. And I sort of realised that if I just lent into the damaged properties of the work, you know, these were photographs that were kind of mundane anyway. They were sort of hidden, and you know, what they were of wasn't necessarily that clear. And the more that I focused on that, the more the work started to kind of emerge. And that was like a really huge, you know, turning point for me coming out of art school. And I was really excited. I was thinking, you know, I'm going to make this work about the photographic object, and you know, I can work with all these materials I've never worked with before. And then obviously COVID happened, so that was February 2020, and COVID hit in March 2020, as we all know. So luckily the NPG started back up during COVID, which was great because I think we were all looking for just an excuse to even get together and talk about work. But we were all in a really tough position because, you know, we couldn't leave the house, and access to resources was limited. Yeah, I'm sort of preaching to the choir. I don't think anyone needs me to really say this, but things became difficult. I was perhaps lucky because of the way that I make images, is that kind of whatever situation I'm in, as long as I have a camera, I go out into the world and I sort of make. So we were given an initial brief by the NPG, which was construct. And we've all, I think, to various degrees, thought about that and maybe discarded parts of it. But I was already thinking about how photography kind of constructs worlds and perspectives and what it hides as much as what it reveals. So during lockdown, I kind of had this guiding principle, which is from a book called Valis by Philip K. Dick. And this principle is: the clue lies there. Symbols of the divine show up in our world initially at the trash stratum. At least that's what I tell myself. And often the images that I make are of, you know, discarded objects, abandoned objects, the mundane. And I feel like I've been trying to find a spirituality in that. I've been trying to find an escape or an estrangement. So because of the pandemic, I had to think about different ways of making work. So I would, scan and print very cheaply. We're lucky enough to have a laser printer at home. I would take the prints, I would manipulate them. But most of all, I really wanted to avoid like a neorealist approach to documenting the pandemic. That just wasn't of any interest to me, to be honest. And I was sort of trying to conjure something different, conjure this grammar of experience, one that is not trying to make any claims about a wider world on in sort of really like obvious ways. Sort of trying to dig down into things that I'm interested in and find these images and hope that they could speak to a wider world. So all of these images that I'm showing were made between last April and now, whenever exploring was possible, whether that was local walks or when things opened up a little bit more, or in my studio. I'm lucky enough to have a studio out in East End. And yeah, my methods during this hasn't really changed much. I hold these ideas in my head and in my heart, and I go into the world with a camera and I make sometimes text, sculpture, and moving image follows. But I think most important to me, all of these images that I've shown today feel like self-portraits. I have a really hard time imagining an objectivity in photography. So for me, these images are all an extension of my body. I think I'm drawn to photographs for the same reason that I'm drawn to rocks and trees and the inanimate and discarded. They all are witnesses to a history that can only reveal as much as they're willing to give up. They can show around the event, but they can never show the event itself. And that's something that I'm really drawn to. That's it from me. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Sean. That was great. There will be time at the end, I should say, for the audience for kind of questions to the artist. So if you do have any comments or questions, please do post them in the chat. But yeah, no, that was great to see, Sean. And I must admit, the tulpa work that you made that was damaged, there was something really kind of beautiful about that destruction and the way that you did kind of lean into it and embrace it. And then those later works that you were shown as well, there's a kind of sort of serene beauty to them, despite knowing they're made in perhaps the most stressful time that some of us all have experienced. So good on you for being able to kind of continue to make.
Thanks, John.
Okay, so the next artist we're going to hear from is Erin Semple. Erin is an artist based in Nairn in the Highlands, and her work draws upon her personal life for inspiration. She co-founded Fresh Focus, which is a peer-led critique group for graduate photographers in association with Stills in Edinburgh. So yeah, take it away, Erin.
Thanks very much, John. And I just want to say thanks to Street Level for having us as part of this event. I really enjoyed watching them during lockdown, so it's an honour to take part. So yeah, as John has already said, I'm Erin. I studied at the Glasgow School of Art and I graduated in 2018 from the MLIT Fine Art Practice Programme. And before that, I studied photography at Edinburgh Napier University and I graduated from there in 2016. My practice involves a lot of self-portraiture, and I look to explore ideas such as constructive gaze and notions of home. And I primarily do that by investigating the self in landscapes and domestic spaces. So tonight, what I'm going to do is I'll just show you the work that I've made prior to applying for the New Photographers Guild, and mostly focusing on my work that is self-portraiture. I feel it's only in the last few years that I've begun to recognise what my practice is. I've been making self-portraits since I was a teenager, but it's only the last couple of years that I've consciously made that decision to make self-portraits as part of my artistic practice. So what I'll begin with is my project Kianalis. Kianalis is a Gaelic word, and it's used to describe a sense of belonging to where your roots really lie. When I first moved to Glasgow in 2017, I felt incredibly homesick. I have lived away from the Highlands since 2012, and I've always had this longing for home. However, my homesickness isn't tied to my hometown or to my parents, it's just tied to the Highlands. I could go somewhere that I've never been before, and I would feel at home there. So that's what I was looking to explore in this project, Kianalis. I decided that I wanted to make self-portraits for this project, as I was often making photographs of my hands and my feet as a way of grounding myself in the work. I feel that landscapes are often seen as something that you need to claim. You know, there's quite a lot of natural energy when it comes to hiking and photography as well. There's a lot of focus on equipment. And as a woman, I've often felt excluded from these places. So it was important for me to make work in landscapes without trying to claim the landscape in any way. So I've made sure to make sure I didn't look like a hill walker, and I wasn't going out with like big fancy technical cameras. It was just me, a wee camera, and the place that felt like home to me. Whilst making this work as well, I was hoping to challenge how we think about landscape and landscape photography, in particular in relation to the Highlands. And that led to experimenting with how we look at photographs. Because photographs by their very nature are two-dimensional, I wanted to bring a physicality to the images. So I began printing photos on fabric, and then I began experimenting further using materials like glass and dirt to hang the images, rather than just, you know, printing them and putting them in a frame and hanging them on a gallery wall. Kianalis then developed further, and it became my final master's project, Gustan Brishanla, which means until the day breaks. The majority of the images in that project are made between my parents' home and at my maternal ancestral home. My mum's side of the family had a croft on the west coast of Scotland up until the 1990s, so just before I was born. And that was the side of the family that spoke Gaelic and had a real connection to the land and to one particular place. And Gaelic was something that became really important to me whilst I was developing my practice, because Gaelic gave me words that allowed me to express how I was feeling, that I couldn't express through words in English. So I felt it was important to go back to that croft in Badlurick and just see the connection that I felt, because I feel like I've inherited these memories of what it means to be a person from the Highlands. And as I said, just like the language is so connected to the land in Gaelic. So that's what I wanted to explore and kind of continue on from my project Kianalis. I do see Gustan Brishanla and Kianalis as chapters of the same work. So they were made in the same way. They're both made with 35mm film and a point and shoot camera. The final show did end up being a little bit more traditional in the way it was presented, and that was due in part to difficulties after the second fire at the Glasgow School of Art. So there is like a tiny bit of fabric printing in that show, but I think I'm going to leave that for a while because I'm fed up with having to iron my work before I show it anywhere. So that takes my practice up until the beginning of the New Photographers Guild. I haven't been making as much as I would have liked due to COVID. I didn't really get to enjoy all of that free time we had in the first lockdown. My main priority was finding more work. I also prefer to make my work outside, preferably where no one can see me, which is rather difficult to do in Glasgow, especially when everyone's going out for their daily walk. But I'm feeling a bit more positive about making work again now that I have moved back to the Highlands, because I do find it just a lot more inspiring, and there's a fair few less people as well. So I'll just show some images that are the beginnings of the project. I'm very fortunate to have received a grant from the Richard and Siobhan Coward Foundation to make this work. And what I'm hoping to do is, using the theme of construct that we were given, I want to construct or deconstruct the idea of a gendered gaze and challenge the idea of gaze I want to embody the energy of a landscape and neutralize the gaze. So hopefully when people look at the images, they're going to start to maybe look at them the way that they would look at a landscape rather than they would look at a person or a portrait. So these photographs are the first attempts at me trying to embody the energy that I felt in a landscape. And I've drawn inspiration from Virginia Woolf's novel The Waves for the title of this triptych. I hope that's given you an insight into my practice. I'm sorry for speaking really fast. And thanks very much for listening.
No, thanks very much, Erin. That was great. And yeah, you don't speak fast at all, so you don't have to worry about it. No, that was a lovely presentation. I must admit, I found that, you know, your comment about grounding yourself in the landscape and kind of rejecting the sort of macho bravado that is associated with a lot of both landscape photography, but particularly the depictions of the Highlands, is really interesting. And that notion of having to iron your work before you show it is a kind of unique problem. Yeah, no, that great presentation. Thanks so much for sharing with us. Okay, so the next artist we're going to hear from is Lyndon Kingston. Lyndon is a Glasgow-based artist, and he works primarily with analog photographic processes alongside sculpture and performance. So Lyndon, I'll hand it over to you.
Hello. Got it there?
That's perfect, Lyndon, yeah.
Great.
Yeah. As John said, Lyndon from GSA with Sean in 2019, so department with Sean. Lucky enough to share a studio with Sean for the past 4 years, and we often make work or go out to make work together. Obviously, pre-COVID times, make work in similar places, but coming from kind of different perspectives. So I kind of make work more about sort of the environmental side and the side stuff looking at sort of climate change. But more recently, I've been looking more into the sort of human nature relationship or the disconnect there, and sort of what we've lost in nature, or maybe things that we've found, and the necessity of wild spaces and spending time outdoors. So the first stuff I've got is from called Buildings, which is stories from 4 around the UK. Each one consists of and images and a story told in person by myself as a performance. And it's sort of looking, like I say, at the importance of wild spaces and sort of the magic of them, I guess. So all the stories are all stories of personal experiences. So they're places that I've been to, I've taken pictures, and I'm telling the story of what has happened when I was there. So these, they're not written down anywhere. They don't exist in any solid form. They're only ever told by myself from memory, or potentially by anyone else who wishes to retell them. Which sort of a more traditional way of passing down information, and it gives it it's more fluid, because sort of, I may have told each story sort of 50 times or something, but I've never told it the same. It changes every time. So they're all stories about me going somewhere, going into a wild space, and what happens. And I think the best ones, particularly that are my favourite ones, and they're the ones that have come about much more organically. They're the ones where I've been, and I guess sort of something unexpected has happened, that's kind of how the project came about when I started making these images for the first story, which is called My Wolf Dog. The idea of storytelling came about purely from when I'd gone home and had told people what happened and sort of retold it, and then sort of the act of storytelling became more like a part of the work. So the works, I'd say most of my influences sort of from what I read, which is a lot of nature, right? For example, Feral Wild Places, they heavily influenced a couple of the space in Williams, and actually the Living Mountain I did a project on as well in third year. But yeah, that's sort of, I think, where the root of a lot of my ideas come from. More recently, through lockdown, as you can probably see, most of my work is not made in the city. It involves travelling, so I've not at all been able to go out and make any work. So I've been kind of sort of trawling through my archives of old images to see if I can pull anything together to make a more cohesive series. But also sort of in lockdown, I think like a lot of other people, it's been a very uninspiring time, sort of feeling quite stifled creatively, which MPG has been a really good thing for. It's kind of been a push for me to keep thinking about work and keep sort of trying to come up with ideas and stuff to make. So as I was going through images, something I found, went to Iceland a couple of years ago, and I've got a lot of images from there that I've not managed to use for anything. I went in fourth year, so I was very much in the middle of a project then, and so I've not yet done anything, but there's something there, but obviously that's a project that will involve travel, and can't be done now. But I was sort of very interested in the geothermal energy and sort of how they use that, and the sort of the energy of the land that they use. But when I was going through these images, I was sort of looking through all these images of like the mountains and the forest and the sea and all of these wild spaces, and sort of was bring back like a lot of like a longing and sort of really wishing, particularly I think a lot of people had time in COVID, but to escape, just to get some clean air and clear your head a little bit. And yeah, just get out and experience that. That idea of nature as like a necessary thing, something we need. So thinking about that, I was thinking about a part of Rebecca Solnit's book, A Field Guide to Getting Lost, where she talks about the blue of distance. And blue as like the colour of longing, but also as the colour of light, sort of refracted over long distances, and that sort of duality and how you can be somewhere and look off into the distance, into the mountains, and they look blue, and there's that sort of sadness that goes along with that, and sort of that idea is something that I've wanted to do something with that since reading the book years ago, and so pulling all these images together, that seemed to come together. So these are some images of what I've sort of come up with so far for MPG, of doing cyanotypes on fabric. So there's 3 images there, just printed from negatives, some acetate negatives, and then one from text that's not so clear there. Yeah, the cyanotypes, as well as having this link to blue, and to that idea of longing and distance, they are something that can be done from home, which fits in very well with not being able to go anywhere and use facilities and stuff. Like the picture on the left there is me just washing the prints in the bath. So yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at with sort of testing for MPG, and that's sort of the direction that I'm heading at the moment. But yeah, obviously there's a lot more testing and a lot more stuff to do with that. But yeah, it's nice to have a bit of direction after having such a long time not being able to make any work. Yeah, that's me.
Thanks very much, Lyndon. That was great. Apologies, we might have had a couple of kind of audio issues at points there, but I think it was okay. But no, that was great. It was really nice to see your work more in depth, and that kind of connection that you made in some of your earlier work around photography and performance was really interesting. And then coming back to making these cyanotypes, it's almost like a performative act, you know, making those cyanotypes anyway. So there's a really nice synergy there. And one thing I'd noted as well was just, you know, you're talking about being stuck in lockdown and kind of revisiting and re-editing older projects or older images. Sometimes that, you know, that editing process can be just as hard, if not harder, than making new work. So good on you for facing that challenge. Okay, the next artist we're going to hear from is Melissa Mitchell, who is an artist from Johnston in Renfrewshire. And since graduating from communication design at Glasgow School of Art in 2018, her practice has become increasingly lens-based, and she uses photography as a means of self-expression and experimentation. So thanks for joining us, Melissa. If you want to share your screen and tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Can you all see what I'm seeing?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, John. Thank you to everybody at Street Level for having us tonight. It's been great to kind of share some work on your platform. So like Sean said, I graduated from Glasgow School of Art in 2018 from the Department of Communication Design, where I spent my last 2 years specialising in photography. Since then, I have spent the last couple of years establishing a socially engaged freelance practice, collaborating on hyperlocal community-driven projects, as well as developing my own fine art practice. So I'm going to show you a few different things, kind of some in my freelance work as well as my fine art practice, because I feel like the two of them kind of complement each other in different ways. So talking about my socially engaged practice, a lot of this work started with a project called The Men's Shed, which I developed in collaboration with Shelter Scotland while I was still a student at the Glasgow School of Art. And with this project, I had the opportunity to work with a local men's shed based in Foxbar, which is in Renfrewshire. I had the opportunity to make a wonderful group of guys who get together every Monday. Well, probably aren't at the moment because of lockdown and everything, but they get together to kind of support each other as well as share skills and kind of create conversation about recovery. So it's a really great space, and I was really delighted to be invited into that space to make these portraits. This work also toured as part of an exhibition that went across the Central Belt in 2019, and we later brought this project home to the pop community art space in Renfrewshire, because I felt like it was only right that the work kind of went back to where it was created. And through this project, I've made a lot of good connections in Renfrewshire to make more work across Renfrewshire with other local community groups. So I Kent Your Feyther is a newspaper which I produce in collaboration with Renfrewshire Leisure at the tail end of 2019 and the beginning of 2020. So I had it made and ready to go at the beginning of the pandemic. So I've now got 300 copies of this newspaper sat in my flat right now, which will hopefully be distributed to the people that they're intended for once everything's kind of more normal. So this is a really great project, and I got to work with a bunch of local residents in Seed Hill which is in the east end of Paisley. It's got a kind of interesting history where it was dominated by kind of industrialism and then later kind of abandoned once all the factories were shut and kind of fell into neglect a little bit. But now, as we're moving kind of towards the future and there's been a lot of investment into the area, it's kind of having a sort of revival, a lot of which is kind of being driven by community arts groups such as the Seed Hill Urban Growing and Regeneration Group, who do a cookery project. They have a cookery course that they do, as well as recycling groups and arts groups. So they're a really great bunch of women that kind of put these things together. From there, I've also been working, well, volunteering at the Sunshine Recovery Cafe, which is also based in Paisley at St Matthew's Church, which goes on every Wednesday. And I've been volunteering with Creative Arts Coordinator with the NHS and artist Sarah Grant, who runs the space. So she runs a weekly arts group where a group of people get together and make work. Some of it more kind of drawing and painting, others more about kind of building things. So we had a whole exhibition of boats in 2019, which was really wonderful. And then last year throughout lockdown, everyone was painting their own album covers, which was super, super fun. It's this belter of Rod Stewart down here at the bottom. Then more recently, I've been doing some sessions with the Glasgow Women's Library, where I've been working with local women's groups, one in particular, Kairos, which is based in Johnston, doing a couple of sessions called Female in Focus, which is a group of sessions that talk about photography and image making and kind of teaching photography to people who aren't all that into cameras, as well as exposing these women to contemporary and historical photographers working in Scotland. So this is a little screenshot from that Zoom last week with some of the women that were involved. And then from there, I'd like to go back to my fine art practice. So coming from the Department of Communication Design, I very much was used to working with project briefs throughout the course. So kind of seeing myself as a fine artist felt very much kind of foreign. But when I got towards the end of my degree, especially when working on my kind of final degree show projects, that was kind of the way I was more drawn to identifying. Brief-based work wasn't really suiting me in the way that I hoped it would. I was kind of having every kind of couple of months during the beginning of the course, having a bit of an identity crisis, thinking, oh, maybe I'm not supposed to be here. I'm struggling to kind of resolve things kind of within the kind of quick turnaround of project after project after project, whereas in my final year, I got to focus on one or two main projects for a long period of time and develop and get really into the kind of nitty gritty of what I was interested in. And I enjoyed that process a lot more than just working on kind of project-based work. So the kind of first piece of work that I really sank my teeth into was a project called Nothing to Wear, which is kind of more of an experiment than anything else. So for this project, I was looking at kind of materiality and kind of fast fashion and consumerism. And from that, I spent, I think, about a fortnight documenting all the clothes in my wardrobe, which involved me literally traipsing a suitcase full of clothes from my flat at the bottom of Garnet Hill all the way to the top of Garnet Hill. And then I soon realised how much of an effort and labour this was, which led me to make these images, which kind of articulate how much fast fashion was really kind of a weight on my shoulders and kind of impacting my life. So since then I've had a good few wardrobe clear-outs because I've definitely got more clothes than I need, and obviously the impact of fast fashion on the environment is something that's really kind of toxic as well, and it's something I'm interested in and kind of want to incorporate more kind of sustainability into both my life and practice. So the project I was specifically referring to when talking about my degree show is a project called Dear Mum. So this project is a kind of, I like to think of it as a kind of visual love letter to my mum, to her body, to her experience as a woman in the 21st century, as well as about her health, her relationship with addiction, being a woman, a mother, a daughter, a sister, kind of all of these elements of the female experience. So this involved taking these really intimate images of my mum, as well as kind of traditional portraits. I also looked at close-ups of the body in kind of different ways, and kind of really trying to get in close and kind of look at our relationship as well as mother and daughter, as well as photographer and sitter throughout the project, as kind of sitting with someone in the studio for weeks at a time is kind of, it really kind of changes the relationship between two people, because you're spending a lot of time just together with no distractions, just kind of looking at each other. So that was really great, and I really enjoyed this. And for this project, it was my kind of first foray into process. The process wasn't something I'd kind of explored up until this point. I kind of very much stuck to digital during my degree because that was what I was comfortable with. But since then, I've been especially interested in using process, specifically analog techniques, to kind of add an extra layer of meaning to my work. And I've currently been exploring a lot with that since I finished my degree, to kind of just find different ways of making images, to see what works, kind of to see how it changes the meaning of an image, or adds some or detracts from the image itself. So during lockdown, we had so much lovely sunshine in the first part, so I spent a lot of time making lumen prints for the first time, which was absolutely glorious. I highly recommend it. If any of you got some spare photo paper lying around, do it, it's so fun. And I've also spent a lot of time with Polaroids as a kind of accessible step into working more with film, because it's less technical wizardry involved rather than just, you know, with a Polaroid camera, it's very much the point and you shoot. There's no exposure, you don't have to worry about it. It's just a kind of, plus you have that kind of, there's that instant thing, because you don't get that with like traditional analog film. You obviously have to wait and process everything, whereas with Polaroids, it's a kind of, you wait 15 minutes and you've got a tangible image, which is really interesting and I really like, and I'm still exploring more with that. I also spent some time last year working with Anthotypes, using spinach, and since then I have started doing a eco darkroom course with artist and photographer Brittany Fletcher, which is also being taught online at the moment through Still Centre for Photography, because I want to kind of add more of a kind of sustainable aspect to my practice. So I've been learning about kind of eco developers and other types of kind of vegetable based emulsions and things like that. I'm hoping to kind of add more into my practice as time goes on. These images here are some more of my kind of Polaroid manipulation experiments. This one was tossed in a vat of bleach for a couple of weeks, and the one on the left is kind of the negative part of the Polaroid cut up and then tossed in some more bleach for another couple of weeks. And then this next project doesn't have a title yet. Technically, I shouldn't really be telling you about it, but I can in a very sneaky way. So this project was the kind of culmination of a collaborative idea with myself and a couple of other artists across Europe, where we each kind of have made a piece of work in response to the work made before. So it started off with a piece of randomly generated code in a randomly generated order, and each artist has been making work in response to the other artist's work. So I've been making work in response to a poem for 2 weeks, which has resulted in these images. I'm not going to show you the poem because that would be cheating. But what I will do is I'll tell you a bit about my thought process behind this, which is kind of very much exploring that idea of making within restrictions, as well as feeling kind of creatively burnt out and out of control during this kind of tumultuous time. So I've been kind of finding small ways that I can kind of almost take back that kind of control. So by making work, you also have the power to destroy it. So what I've been doing is been making these self-portraits and then firing them in the microwave and destroying them in various different ways to kind of take that back and kind of, yeah, just reclaim that idea. These are some more. In terms of the New Photographers Guild, I've kind of fallen in and out of love with the word construct throughout the course of the programme. And I've kind of gone back to notions of home. I very much felt homesick during this time. The one thing I've missed the most is family. Unfortunately, last year we lost a very dear member of our family, which was my 85-year-old granny, Betty, who was absolutely wonderful and a total inspiration. So I've been spending a lot of time going through a kind of small portion of our family archive, looking at images and just kind of thinking about grief, about love, about loss, and trying to kind of string all these thoughts together. So these are just a kind of selection of images from the archive, as well as some images on my phone, which I've been taking throughout kind of before her passing and kind of during my grieving process. But yeah, this work is something I'm really kind of drawn to working on. I have high hopes for it, and I'm looking to explore further as part of the programme. But yeah, that's me. So thank you so much, everybody. Worried I talk too much.
No.
Thank you so much for sharing, Melissa. That was wonderful. It was really nice to see the real breadth and range of your practice, from the kind of socially engaged work that you showed us at the start, then to your kind of more recent projects. And I was really struck in this kind of later project, focusing on your grandmother in comparison to the work you made about your mum, that kind of multifaceted approach to kind of building a portrait of someone and a relationship with someone was really, really beautiful. So yeah, I'm sure there'll be lots of questions about that in the Q&A shortly. But yeah, thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
And then finally, the last artist we're going to hear from tonight is Fiona Hunter. Fiona is a Scottish photographer and designer currently based in The Hague in the Netherlands. She's a graduate of Communication Design department at Glasgow School of Art as well. And her practice is a means of telling stories, drawing inspiration from colour, texture, vulnerability, and life's in-between moments. So I'll hand over to you, Fiona, if you want to share with us some of your work.
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. My name's Fiona. I'm a photographer and a designer from the west coast of Scotland. Although, as John said in his introduction, during the last year, I relocated from Glasgow to the Netherlands. Tonight, I'm going to take you through a previous project of mine before talking about the work I've been making as part of the New Photographers Guild, and also talking a little bit about where my head's been at during the past year. So for both the projects I'll be talking about this evening, they're really based around the idea of place. About 40 miles from Glasgow is Faslane Naval Base, as Sean nodded to in his talk. And my hometown of Helensburgh is somewhere in between. So Faslane is well known as Britain's home of their nuclear weapons. However, what I think is slightly less well known is that convoys travel across the country from the south of England to Faslane carrying nuclear warheads all throughout the year. And the government just announced they're increasing their warhead count, so no doubt there'll be plenty more of these trips to come. Within anti-nuclear campaign groups, it's customary to film the convoys on the roads, share their locations, and kind of highlight their proximity to everyday life. Inspired by this, I decided to take the existence of these convoys to the streets, creating a typical road sign. And I took this out and documented it in situ on some of the roads that these travel on. So as I was saying, I took this road sign out to the roads where these convoys travel, and particularly along a section near Helensburgh and Loch Lomond. And it's really quite a picturesque area. It's got rolling hills, got fields and forests, and there's lots of houses kind of dotted throughout it. I really wanted to capture a surreal quality to the landscape and juxtapose a kind of ominous presence looming behind it, and convey a message that I really care about growing up near this issue. So continuing with the exploration of place and how we interact with our environment, and I want to talk about some of my more recent work for the NPG. As I mentioned earlier, in August, I moved to the Netherlands. This was quite a challenging move. However, I can't help but recognize the privilege that comes in moving as a white English speaker to a country that is also predominantly white and speaks English very widely. I know I've been incredibly fortunate in my experience of moving countries, and that for many others, it's much more difficult. But that being said, moving countries during a pandemic is definitely not easy. COVID has inhibited all the usual routes of meeting folk, forming or joining a community, establishing yourself, and kind of creating a fulfilling life. As for so many during the pandemic, and much of my peers in the MPG, finding any motivation and inspiration to make work has really been an uphill struggle. And, you know, not to mention all the practical issues brought on by COVID too. As you've seen in my previous projects, I'm interested in social issues, external factors, humanity. There's been no shortage of social issues this past year, but for me, this has been a kind of important time for reflection, and I've not felt able or qualified to rush to comment on this year's past events that I don't think I fully comprehend yet. So in light of these things, I started to look at my own situation to find inspiration. At first, there was initial excitement of being in a new place, exploring a city like a tourist. But over time, this kind of grew to disconnect and a lack of belonging. With no real roots, there's definitely a feeling of impermanence. The isolation of moving to a foreign place has been exacerbated by the isolation caused by COVID, or possibly vice versa. So it's these sorts of themes and feelings that I've been trying to document and convey through my images, ideas of place and connection or lack of to your surroundings. As for many couples in lockdown, I now spend almost all my time with my partner, who I moved here with. Without a community here, there's very limited connections in the city, and our world has shrunk to basically just each other. When you spend so much time with someone, there's an increased level of intimacy, but it also brings a heightened level of dependence, and it's a kind of dichotomy of these two factors that I'm wanting to further explore, also along with a sense of mundanity about our lives. These images are very much works in progress, and we'll see how it all develops. But as this project is a look at place and a headspace that I'm still very much in, it will inevitably continue, and I'm looking to work through it and explore it further. Just to round up, you can find me on the web or on Instagram. If you have any questions or fancy a chat, then please get in touch. And thanks very much for your time tonight.
Thank you so much, Fiona. Thanks for sharing with us. That was really interesting. I was really taken by the project around Faz Lane and these kind of beautiful photographs of a really haunting and terrifying kind of prospect that, I mean, I guess Sean alluded to it as well in his this thing that's just around the corner from us that everyone knows about but no one really speaks about. So really drawing attention to that is really important, I think. And I can only applaud you for having the kind of courage and tenacity to move during COVID and everything that brings. And it was a really nice insight, those kind of last few slides that you shared, just a kind of insight into your process, and I guess as well kind of into your life and how you're coming to terms with everything that's happening in the world and in your new situation. So thanks very much for sharing that with us all. So we've got a bit of time for audience questions and any comments. I think you can all agree that it's been a great series of presentations from you all, and really excited to see the kind of culmination of New Photographers Guild and where you guys go after that. But let me just check and see if we've got any questions or comments. There's been lots of really lovely comments kind of pouring in throughout. One of the first comments we got was from Zoe Hamill, who herself was a member of the New Photographers Guild. And she said that the New Photographers Guild was so valuable in providing me with a peer group in a new city and redirected my practice. And I think she won't be the only person who kind of feels like that. I know certainly from my own experience that was the case. A question for Melissa. A few people have been asking about your publication and if that will be available to the public or if they can pick up a copy somewhere.
So unfortunately not at this particular point in time. So the copies that I have here are for distributing to the local community in Steed Hill, but perhaps in the future there might be some sort of publication in the pipeline.
Okay,
we'll
great.
See.
Well, there definitely seems to be an audience for it, so that would be fantastic.
Surely some copies for Street Level.
Well, we would love to have some copies as well, definitely. Here's a question for kind of the group. What's the best you want to see in terms of your own work post-lockdown? Where to now? That's a big question to start off the Q&A.
Well, that's a difficult question. What I would like to say is, I mean, when somebody comes onto the course, I'm sure Claire will agree, we already think of the mentees as already really good artists, and we always think they're already producing good work. So I think this is a really good question, because one of the things that we want to do is get beyond just having good work and maybe get the just rewards for that good work. And of course, that's not just down to your work. So I'll go back to the mentees, but that's what I wanted to say about it.
I think for me, that's like part of a wider conversation about how we keep art accessible as we come out of sort of the pandemic. So, you know, it's quite complicated, but I think it's been really important for institutions to recognise that the adjustments that they've had to make during the pandemic should not be short-term solutions. And I think for me, seeing my work, the goal would be to see my work in, you know, in places that continue to like really push for accessibility, both sort of physically and for audiences as well. Like, I know that my work isn't necessarily hugely accessible, but it would be good if that sort of like barrier between the public and art institutions that can feel quite exclusionary would continue to be like broken down. And yeah, not a direct answer to the question, but kind of related to it, I suppose. I just like my work to be seen anywhere is the easy answer to that question. But
I think you're right though. If the experience of COVID and everything is taught us anything, is, you know, there are ways and means of making things accessible, and even, you know, that our kind of program of online talks, the feedback that we've had is that, you know, people who aren't necessarily based in Glasgow in the local area have been able to kind of connect and come together and enjoy presentations and talks and different things. And I think that's important that things like this kind of continue in some form or another going forward. Hopefully there will be positives to come out of this. strange and unusual time. We've got a question here from Christina Weber, who I think a few of you might know quite well. She was just asking, what one piece of advice would you each give for this? Let me read this again, sorry. What one piece of advice would you each give for this entering the bizarre grey area of the post-art school void?
I'd say keep making stuff.
Keep making stuff.
Yeah, just keep making stuff, even if it's just for the pure joy of it. Just keep making stuff. You know, it'll resolve itself eventually. You know.
I think what Sean had said before about the realization of the degree should not necessarily being the final thing, but actually maybe the start of something else, and that kind of experience of maybe like a burnout where you take a little break after graduating is totally understandable. But yeah, I've heard a few people say that just keep making, keep making. It's the one thing you can do, right?
Apply for everything as well. Try turning the application process into like the goal in and of itself, because you're going to get a lot of rejections and it sucks. It's awful. But if you can like turn the goal of the application process into like how many applications can I finish, and then whatever happens after that is kind of a bonus. Very hard to practice what I preach with that, but that's what I would recommend.
I think Christina's a great example of that, because she's doing her night walks and carrying on making. And Claire, I think Claire's always said to me one of the things, well, she can speak for herself, of course, but this idea of keeping some momentum through the programme was always in the back of her mind about the NPG.
Yeah, I think it's difficult when you come out of college and you graduate, that you quite often have to have a job and have to keep that going. And what I found with the MPG, with people that are on the MPG, is that even though they have jobs, they have this sort of focus month to month that they can, think about something else in addition to doing the work that they're doing. And it really helps to sort of keep them on track. Whereas sort of left to your own devices, and I was in that situation as well, the part-time job becomes the main focus and you lose sight of, where you've been. So I think it's really important to, and if you're not joining things like MPG, then to try and create a group of peers, like-minded people, just your pals even, and having somewhere where you can talk about what you're doing on a regular basis is really helpful, I think.
Definitely. Fiona, were you going to come in on that for one piece of advice?
Just something fairly similar to what Claire finished up with, was about, finding a community and a group that you can kind of like make the transition with, because it's a weird time, and I feel like, whether it's talking about work or just like supporting each other and getting through it with some like-minded folk is really important.
Christina's just commenting there saying, keep making stuff, it will resolve itself eventually, which is what Melissa had said, is the wisdom we all need on a Tuesday evening. So yeah, definitely. There was another question that kind of picked up on what Claire was saying there. The New Photographers Guild isn't institutionally driven, it's not part of your studies or whatever. So what is it that kind of keeps you driven to take part? Why are you doing it when there is the kind of issues around making a living, paying bills, day-to-day life, and especially again given this kind of recent situation, there's been so many other things. Like, what is it that kind of keeps you all motivated and keeps you going?
Stubbornness.
This is as good a reason as any, definitely.
I think the joy of making things as well. And being able to like see something like at the end of like a day of printmaking, to see a table full of things that you've sat there and made with your hands, and the kind of magic that's involved in doing that, I think is always really, really satisfying and magical. And I think that's what's keeping me excited about it and excited to kind of keep going.
Definitely.
For me, it's the idea that the next photo will be the one that explains it all. Like the next image is the one that will make all of it make sense. And it's always the next one. That's what keeps me going.
It's a long journey, Sean.
It's a long journey.
I get you make it sound, it's almost like, you know, chasing that fix. The next one will be, you know, I just need that one next one. But I guess I think anyone who's involved in kind of the arts and stuff has that kind of experience. You do it because you don't know what else to do. And that seemed evident, you know, from kind of Fiona and Erin's work, you know, making things with a camera is a means to understanding what's going on around you. You do it innately, and I think that's really nice, and it's a real privilege for you all to kind of share your work with us and with the audience with us here tonight. We've got kind of probably about a couple of minutes left to go, so we've got space for a couple more questions. There was one that had come in earlier that was I think more geared for Melissa, which was just does your own personal work and poetic practice fit harmoniously with the work you describe as socially engaged, i.e. working with other people to bring out their creativity? Because that was, you know, two very kind of divergent approaches, but there is a sort of symbiosis, but there seems to be a kind of humanity between the two approaches that kind of meets in the middle somewhere.
I think so. So I always kind of try to do something different, like each time I try to do and kind of anything. But also kind of text is sometimes important in the work that I'm doing, and kind of trying to incorporate that in different ways, and then kind of incorporate image making in ways that's accessible as well. So for like a lot of my freelance work that's kind of more socially engaged, I'm kind of working digitally and I'm working with other kind of creative people. One of the people that I actually photographed for the newspaper, she's a poet, and I ended up writing a poem as part of that newspaper to kind of, instead of having some kind of artsy textual piece in the front, I felt like a poem kind of described the kind of the feeling I had in that place and the feelings that I had with the people in that place more aptly than a kind of piece of like artsy jargon loaded text would. But yeah, definitely, I think there's a symbiosis there. I think it's the love of people, a love of storytelling, kind of feeds through the two things.
Okay, we've got a question from Arthur Montgomery, who was also a previous MPGer, who's asking, did you all find that the motivation from being on the MPG programme has allowed you to look into more personal aspects of one's life and experience, more in depth than, say, doing a degree work? Like, did you find the projects you were working on through the MPG took you down a different path, or gave you more kind of scope to look, you know, look at more personal aspects or considerations to your work?
I wouldn't say so. My work has always been quite introspective. All the like projects I did, like particularly when I studied at Napier, which was a lot more focused on like documentary photography, and it wasn't focused on fine art at all. Where I really wanted to like make work was in like the more fine art kind of personal aspect, which is why then I went to study at GSAs. So I think for me anyway, making personal work is probably one of the primary like motivations. So I want to understand like myself in order to understand like everything else that's going on, and that's why I make work.
What about yourself, Lyndon? Did you find that your approach kind of changed when it came to the MPG work, or was it just a kind of continuation of?
I think maybe more recently I've been thinking a little bit more introspectively, but I don't know if it's necessarily due to MPG. It's maybe more due to just being stuck at home and having a lot of time to think about stuff, and I guess a lot of time to reflect. Like the work, sort of, unlike Erin, my work is sort of not hugely sort of personal and particularly intimate to myself. But more recently, I've maybe been thinking about that a little bit more. But I don't think it's necessarily due to MPG.
Mm. And how you know, because I think you guys had maybe like one meeting in the real world before kind of COVID hit. So how have you guys found this experience of doing it kind of digitally or kind of at arm's length? Have you guys been able to kind of meet and sort of build connections amongst each other, or do you just kind of come together for the MPG meetings?
I think it's been difficult because we haven't had the opportunity to just like, you know, go and grab a pint after the meeting and and kind of build that like relationship where you can just like sort of chat about work and chat about stuff that isn't related to work, because the structure of it was there's a Zoom and it's at this time and we're going to come on, and like, and then there's like the anxieties of not maybe being able to make the work that you want, and also even just conveying like the stuff that you've been working on is much harder when you're maybe behind the screen than it would be just being around a table and be like, well, look at this and talking about it. But I think recently, over the last couple of months, certainly we've established our kind of, we've got a group chat, and we like, you know, fire things into there and we talk about it there, and I really feel like it's becoming more like that, which is good, because when restrictions do lift, it'll be much easier to be like, let's just hang out and talk about this stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
And we do think that the mentees have been really resilient. Claire and I have spoken about this a lot. They've been really resilient through this brutal year, you know. So I think all the work you've shown has been brilliant. So congratulations.
And
Yeah.
part of you know, as you know, John, the way that we do things is that we work with paper. You know, we have things printed off and we shove them around a table, and we're quite old school about how we do that. And when Sean was saying earlier about things getting back to to be able to show his work and the physicality of the work, that's what we're all sort of like really interested in getting back to as well. You know, so Zoom is only a poor substitute for what we like to, the way that we like to work.
Yeah.
Well, I think you got, you know, the work that you guys have shown and made even before the MPG shows that you are a really kind of strong, ambitious, resilient group of artists. And there's a comment from Robert Henderson, who was also an MPG, and he was in the same kind of year group as me. He just said, really amazing work by all the presenters. Love the openness as well as the thoughtfulness. And I think that kind of, I really share his sentiment in that. And what I will say, even though you guys might not have been able to get together in person as much as you like, once an MPG, you're always an MPG. You'll always have that connection and that kind of, especially if you didn't necessarily know each other that well before it, you come together to have these conversations, and there is still people who were on the intake with me that I'll kind of run work by or speak to and keep in contact with. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing with us. I think we'll wrap it up there. But if there is any more comments or any comments that I didn't get to come to, the comments will exist. The video will be uploaded to Facebook once we finish. So if you are inclined, you can go through and read back through some of the comments and reply to anyone that you might want to. But yeah, all that's left for me to say is thank you very much, and thank you to the audience for joining us. We'll be back next Thursday with a close-up event focused on the work of Robert Blomfield. So yeah, hope to see some of you then. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.